Do you understand? Do you understand what you have been given from God? Now, I'm not talking about Jesus Christ. I'm talking about your measure of faith. There are a lot of things going on with us that we don't understand what we really have been given from God. See, I just want to share. You don't have to go there. In this one verse I had read this morning, I'm going to be bringing it back up. In Romans chapter 12, verse 3, when Paul talks to the Romans about serving God with spiritual gifts, in verse 3 he says, "For I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith." Do you know what you have been given in that measure of faith? See, a lot of people don't know what that is. We think it's something that God has given to us, and it's something that is like a ticket into the kingdom. But it's more than that. You see, I learned something this morning about this when I was reading my word in Luke chapter 19, where we're going to be in the first 10 verses. That we cannot judge the measure of faith based on the things that we gain or the things that we do, but it is the way that we stand and we behave. It is what people see of us, through us, that praises God. Not what we tell them they need, the direction they need to go, but who we truly are in God. So why don't we go to Luke chapter 19 and I can unfold the rest. In Luke chapter 19 from verse 1 to verse 10, I know when Jennifer told me she was in Luke 18, I was like, oh my God, is this going to be like I got to change my message? Only God would do that to me, right? How many times? Okay, chapter 19, 1 through 10, it says, this is about Jesus comes to Zacchaeus' house, okay? And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Let's stop. After I read this, my first question was, why did he call him, he also is a son of Abraham? I had to really take a look at what he was saying, because it's what God has given. You see, Zacchaeus was judged by everybody else because he was a tax collector. Now, as Jennifer's verses was saying, the tax collector was literally calling, the Pharisee was calling the tax collector an extortionist. He's unjust. He's unlike, because the tax collector had to collect the money for the government from the people by any means. And some of them were really cruel. Yeah, they didn't give anybody a chance. Or they took more than they should have. So the tax collectors had a bad reputation. But Zacchaeus makes it known. He makes it known to Jesus that he is not such a man. But the people judged him. And I was just up here a little earlier saying how this is why dark is getting darker. Because the children of light is getting darker. They're taking the word of God, right? They're taking the gospel and they're turning it around as a judgment tool upon others. So people who should know God, who is walking with God, right? Following Jesus along and all he has done, still judging this man because he's part of another group. He's judged by association, right? So the people are complaining that Jesus is going with this man. But see, God doesn't do anything for nothing. He doesn't. He knows the reputation of Zacchaeus, just like he knows yours. And he knows people will judge you like he's being judged. But Zacchaeus received the Lord joyfully. He was happy to have this man in his house, have Jesus in his house. But when people were getting angry and started to complain, he turned to the Lord and he told the Lord what he has been doing. This is what he says. He said, look, Lord, I give half my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. Now he tells the Lord what he's been doing. It says he's a rich man. And he gives half of his goods. That means half of his paycheck, half of his needs, half of everything he has, he gives it away. Because to him, this is serving God. And for many of us, we're not like this, are we? We're not. Because he relates that behavior of giving half to being a son of Abraham. He says, today's salvation has come to this house because he also is a son of Abraham. He also, when he says also, he's saying you and me. Jesus and Zacchaeus, look at us, you two, me and you, sons of Abraham. Why? Because they give half or they give it all. Jesus gives it all, right? He's going to give up his whole life for mankind. Zacchaeus is giving half of everything, even part of his livelihood, for those who have need. Now, if you take a look at in relationship, why he calls him a son of Abraham is because of what happens in Genesis. Now, I'm not going to read the whole story, but remember, Abraham's faith had to be confirmed. In chapter 22 of Genesis, this one verse, chapter 2, it says that he said, God told Abraham, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Stop. Because God was telling Abraham, you love this boy as you love yourself. That's how much you love him. You love him more than anything. Your wife, your goods, everything. You love this one more than anything. That's why he makes it a point to say, whom you love. Because when you love something, you become one with something. You know what I mean? When you give yourself completely to it. Yeah? But God is asking Abraham to give a part of himself. And the big part is Isaac. So Abraham goes ahead and does what God asks. Even though he loves him, even though Isaac is his heart, part of his soul, God has asked for him. So now we come to the place where he's making the burnt offering, preparing. He lays Isaac on the offering, and we come into verse 10, where he says, and Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. He was willing to give up his son. In other words, he was willing to give up half of himself, to let it go because he loved God more. Get it? He gave up half of himself because he loved God more, even though he loved Isaac. He put God first. So he gave the part of him, the part of his soul, the part that no man can give but himself. He was willing to sacrifice because God has asked. When you go to Zacchaeus, when you come to Zacchaeus, yeah, it's the same thing. He says, I give half. I give half of my goods, half of everything I have to the poor, to the less fortunate, because they don't have. I give it to them. Because why? Because I love God more. He wanted to see Jesus because he loves God. And yet God noticed Zacchaeus. And he's making a point of this by telling him, I'm going to stay at your house. I'm going to. Because Zacchaeus is worthy. Zacchaeus is worthy of the presence of God in his home. Zacchaeus is worthy because he holds nothing back. He holds nothing back because he loves God more. Just like Abraham giving up Isaac because he loves God more. And him doing that confirms that he trusts God more by giving up Isaac. Right? Isn't that what God tells him? But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven saying, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here I am. And he said, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Your only son, the one you love the most, the one that's a part of your very soul. You didn't hold him back. You put me above him. You love me more. Zacchaeus is doing the same thing. He's putting God first. And he's letting go half of himself, half of his livelihood, half of his existence to help those who are less fortunate. And in that, he and Jesus are on the same page. They are the same heart. They have that same love. Because Jesus is going to lay down his life for all of us completely as a sacrifice, as a substitute. But when he tells him that, Lord, I give half my goods to the poor, Jesus says to him, today salvation has come to your house. He says, I have come. I am salvation. I am Messiah. I am Christ, right? Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah. I am your salvation. I am salvation. And he says, salvation, me, has come to this house. This house, because it is worthy. Because he also, you, Zacchaeus, and salvation and the Son of Man are sons of Abraham. We give it all. We'll give it. You know, we struggle with this, don't we? We struggle with giving God. See, this is why churches do the 10% thing, because that's all people can handle. What if the church told you you had to give 50% every week? Or 50%. Could you do it? Could you love God more and give half of everything? Half of your paycheck, half of your goods, half of your tips, half of everything you have every week. Of whatever you have, can you give half of it away to God? Most cannot, because we look from paycheck to paycheck. And we jump, but we don't see that we have this life. And we can't even give up half of our life to help the poor, help someone else in need, give up our time, you know? And this is what he's talking about. Jesus is giving up his life so that others could find their way. The Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost, because people are losing their way. My question to God last night is, why is the dark getting darker? He says the dark isn't getting darker. Light is getting darker because people are thinking of themselves and using the gospel as a judgment tool on others. It is no longer about what we have with God and how we have to look at ourselves. It is how we see other people, and hence we are turning light into darkness. That's why the dark is getting darker. It's multiplied because the children of light are turning. And Jesus has come to those who do not understand. He has come to seek and save those things that are lost, who have lost their way, who only look at rituals and laws, who doesn't understand what God is really doing in their life. But Zacchaeus knows what God is doing, and he knows in his heart what is right to do, just like Abraham. They know what is right to do, so they do it. They hold nothing back, because this is about God in your life, people. This is not about you. You don't come to church for you. You come to church for him. For him. This is the measure he's given you. What do you do with it? When you read further, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in the parable of the minas that follows from verse 10 to 27, I'm not going to read it all, but let me paraphrase. What happens is the master is leaving, so he calls 10 of his servants, and he gives each servant 10 minas. That's what he does. He puts his trust. This is like God giving us a measure of faith. He measures it out equally to everybody. But we think that measure of faith, well, it is a measure of trust given from God. It's what do you do with what he's given to you? Now, there's one who comes back when he comes and he collects from everybody, settles the accounts, and the one with 10 comes back and he says, look, I give you 10 more. Another comes back with his 10 and says, look, I have 5. And likewise, on and on and on. But one comes back and he says, he opens the handkerchief and he gives him back what was his. There's no multiplication. There's nothing. There's only what the master gave him. Yeah. But he feared the master because he feared judgment. And he was afraid that the master would judge him based on what he could not do instead of who he was. And this is kind of how we look at God. What God can do, not who God is. And we base the way we walk with God on that very understanding. What he can do, not who he is. Zacchaeus is giving half of his good because of who God is, not what God is asking him to do or what God can do. He's not doing to gain anything, only to glory, to give glory. Abraham does the same thing. In this one, so does the one with the 10. The one with the 10 gives it all and he multiplies. Now, that measure, okay, we're coming to it now. That measure is about that discipline. It's not about having faith and your faith growing. It does, but not that way. See, that which was given to us is what God uses to give us to keep us straight. It's a measure of trust that God gives us. It's a standard by which we appraise ourselves. It is. Because God has allotted us a measure of pride, a measure of self, in other words, a measure of trust in self, in yourself. So by that measure that he has given, we are prevented from, it helps us not to think of ourselves more highly than we should. It keeps us humble. It keeps us in that place. That's what it does. And that humility multiplies. Because in that humility, we learn about God. So that measure that says God is God, that piece he gave you that says I am God, is what we're multiplying. We're not multiplying the faith or trust, yes. but it's about knowing that God is God. That's what multiplies it. You get it? So, and God gives us a measure, just like Zacchaeus. He gives half because this is how he sees God. God is the other half of his life. He gives half. Jesus, God is everything. He gives his whole life. Abraham, God is everything. He's willing to give up Isaac. But what about us? God has given us something so we can measure ourselves against ourselves, so we can judge ourselves. But what we do is we take what God gives and we wrap it up and we keep it to ourselves. We keep ourselves to ourselves. In other words, and we don't judge ourselves or praise ourselves, right? So we do think of ourselves more highly because why? Because we're not allowing God to become more or multiply. That measures a piece of him, and we're multiplying him in our life, that he becomes more. So the one who was given 10 has 10 more because God has become that greater. The master has become greater in his life. He's not afraid. Just like the one but the one who knows they have God in their life and they keep it to themselves, God ain't multiplying. God ain't getting any more. You're where you're at because this is how you see God. You're not getting stronger because you're not learning. You're not getting stronger because you're not disciplining yourself to put God in his proper place so he can multiply in your life. And you're not seeing it. But Abraham saw it. Zacchaeus saw it. Jesus saw it. And he tried to teach this to us through the parables of the minas, the talents, the denaries, that God has given us a piece of himself. And it's not about multiplying the piece. It's about multiplying God. And having more God and less you. More of him, you can get rid of stuff. Make room. Give half of your goods because God is more. But we get lost in this, don't we? We judge ourselves because we're afraid. We don't want to let go because we are afraid to let go of this life. We're afraid to give ourselves completely to God because we don't know what God's going to ask of us. We don't know how God's going to judge us. We don't know if it's right or wrong. It's not about right and wrong, and it's not about pleasing or not pleasing. It's about God. Is he in your life or not? Is he more or not? Because if he is not more, he will not multiply. He will not become more if you don't let him be more. And in that you will be judged. The one who puts mina in the handkerchief, the one that keeps it in the handkerchief, he tells him, why could you not have put it in the bank? And at least I would have gotten something. In other words, why didn't you just open up and look at it? Why didn't you talk? Multiply it at least a little bit. See it for what it is, even a little bit. Then at least it would have multiplied. It would have been at least a little bit more, but he wouldn't. And many people are falling into that place. They're not giving themselves to God. They expect God to give themselves to them. And many Christians think that way, that God gives, God heals, we expect God to do without change. No, God gives to those who trust him. He takes care of his own. And yet God is asking us to trust him when we're sick, trust him when we're broke, trust him when we have nothing, to trust him more than this life. But we look at this life and we put it before him. And hence God is not multiplying. God's not becoming more. So when you become strong and you can give half or you can give it all, you found God. Because God is more important. You know he is. You know he is. See, it keeps us from thinking ourselves more highly than we ought to think. Because when you recognize, and this is what I go, when you recognize that your measure comes from God, when you recognize that that measure that God is giving you comes from God alone, God, it prevents pride. It prevents your pride and encourages a sober judgment of self. It helps you see yourself through his eyes. Not one that you make up clouded in rose-colored glasses, but one of truth. Because you know you're holding back. You know you're not sacrificing. You know you're not opening up. You know you're holding it in a handkerchief. You know you're holding God in a handkerchief. You're afraid. You're afraid to let it go. You're afraid to share it. The one with the 10 minas, remember he goes and he tells him, go and do business till I come. It's about testifying. It's about merchant. It's about sharing to multiply him. And the one with the 10 did a lot of sharing in order to multiply the goodness of God in his life. That not only did he get 10 more, but he got 10 cities on top of that. And when this one with the handkerchief could not, and the master judged him accordingly, he said, give that to the one who has 10. And then they complain, but he already has 10. That's what they say in verse 25. Verse 24, he says, and they said to those who stood by, take the meter from him and give it to him who has 10. And then they complained. But they said to him, Master, he has 10 minas. I read this, I was like, wow. He has 10 minas. And that's the point. For I say to you that to everyone who has will be given. Everyone who has God and puts God in that place and is willing to allow God to be in their life, you will have more of God in your life. More of him will be given to you. More of his presence, more of his voice, more of his spirit in your life. More. Because only God can do this. You cannot. You are the vessel that shares it. You are the vessel that works it. You are the one who has to let it go to make room for God to come in. We're the ones holding back and not letting go. How is God supposed to give and multiply in your life and become more if you hold everything back? You see, we are a selfish generation. We only think of ourselves, even come before God so boldly as to tell him, you said in your scriptures, and we tell him what he said and tell him what he got to do. That's pride and ego, and nobody sees the problem or the fault in that. I would never, even when Jesus was tempted by Satan, even when he said, jump off this cliff, for the scripture says, because Jesus said, it says, man shall not live by bread alone. Well, quickly the devil jumped on that one and says, yeah, but if you jump off of this, it says in the scriptures, that he will take charge over you, lest you dash your foot and all of this. Jesus said, I will not test God. I will not put him to the test. I will not make God prove himself to me. And that's what we do. You said, so prove yourself. Prove that you are God. How many of you have said that? If this is you. I did that in the beginning when I was walking with him and he was asking me to give up a company, a $1 million company to do this. God was asking much of me. Much. Because he was asking me to let go of a company so that I can serve him for nothing. I wasn't even a minister. I was nothing. I was just somebody who went to church and sat in the pews and prayed. That's all I did. But he was asking me to give up a company, go into the church and pray, to do those things. Having been a single mom with 2 kids, if I gave up that company, I have no job, no money, no nothing. And God was asking for this, to let it all go. I remember that day. I remember the day. And I made him prove himself. If this is you, I did the Gideon thing. If this is you, do this. If this is you. If this is you. And he did it. As soon as I asked, if this is you, do this. And he did it. If this is you. If this is you. I want to see a car with a license plate with the word angel on it. Yeah. Let's see if you can do that. Kind of like that. And guess what? Not even 5 minutes. Here comes a car and the license plate said freaking angel. I laughed so hard I was crying. I stopped. God did everything I asked on my journey to work. He did it all. And finally, I just stopped. I went into because I was the CEO and president of my own company, I pulled into my parking stall. I sat there and I told God, how do I do this? How do I just let it all go? How do I do this? And I'm thinking, my kids, my livelihood, everything, you're asking me to let it all go. How do I do this? How do I do this? And I looked up, and right in front of my car was a Nike truck with a big check that says, just do it. And I surrendered. I said, I'm going to do this. And within a week, I was out of the company. I did it. I walked away because God was burning so strong in me. He became more to me than life. Even though I needed that life to take care, God was asking for more because he was more to me. I was willing to do it for me, but the children, but God said he would take care. I had to just learn to do it and to trust what he has given to me so that he can become more, so he can do the work that he wants to do through me. You understand? No matter the judgment, no matter what people say, no matter what it is, God wanted me. And he was asking for more of me, just like he's asking for more of you. But we don't know how to prove it because we hold ourselves back, our life in this handkerchief, keeping God in this place because we don't want to step out. We don't want to trust God. We don't want to put ourselves out there. so that God can become more in our life and in theirs. We hold ourselves back like this, and we put ourselves into judgment because we put God in this handkerchief. And we keep him here because it's safe for us. It's safe for us, but for nobody else but us. And this is what he's saying. It's only you. It's only you doing this to yourself. But that measure was so that God could become more. That measure gives us the right to humble ourselves. Or it teaches us that we are too prideful, that we think of ourselves more. Is God more in our life as he is in Zacchaeus' or in Abraham's? Are we sons of Abraham or not? Not because of the bloodline, but because of trust and faith. And the true sons of Abraham has God in their life, people. Not in words and in deeds, but truly the presence of God. God speaks to them, talks to them, works through them. And the only way he can is if he is more than you. For God to work through me, he has to be more than me. I have to be less and he has to be more. More in my life, more in my presence, more than the world, more than you he has to be to me. So he can work. Is he like that to you? If he is not, then there's a work to do. Because he dealt you a measure. He gave it to you so you have a place to start. But you take that measure and you keep it and thinking like, this is my salvation. No. That little piece is not your salvation. It's the beginning of your salvation. It's the start of a new life, a new way and a new direction. It can keep you. When God becomes more, you become less prideful. When God becomes more, you become less concerned of the world because God is taking care of you. When God is more in your life, you're not afraid. You're not afraid to let go of what he asks to let go. The struggle is you are afraid. You are afraid, just like the one with the one mina. Too afraid to let go of life. Too afraid to let go of people. Too afraid to let go of goods. Too afraid to be honest with yourself. So hence you can't be honest with God, can you? Yet he's there. He gave you that so that you would know he's there. He's there in your life. He's there to guide you and lead you. And many people have lost their way because they're only looking at self and forget about God. They think they can gain the kingdom if they keep calling on his name and holding God accountable. When God, Jesus teaches us, when God is more, you just want to be with him. You don't hold God accountable. You hold yourself accountable to that truth. You hold yourself because you understand what you have been given. You understand what he gave you, not only through his son, but personally. Personally. Let's close in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. How interesting, yeah? I know, right? Verse 7 to 10 about the thorn in the flesh. Look at what Paul says. From verse 7 to verse 10 of chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians, this is what Paul says. At least I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelation. A thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. Let's stop. Okay, that's what we do. We plead to God to take it away from us. Take away this thing that's burdening me. Take away this thing that's making me sick. Take away this thing that's making me feel broken. Take away this thing that's troubling me. This is what we do. Yeah. This is exactly what we do. But God has put it there because in some way or measure, you're exalting yourself above him. Because you cannot trust what he's putting you through. You can't seem to see it. It's funny how he says, well, Paul says, a messenger of Satan. In other words, a messenger of the world. In other words, when God is using the worldly things to beat on you. To buffet means to beat or beat down. And that's what he's doing. He's using your worldly issues to beat you down because you are exalting yourself above God. And Paul is saying, least I should exalt myself above the measure that was given to me. In other words, if I put myself above God, by the abundance of revelation that God has given to me, and I take it for myself and say, look what I got, look what I see. No, God gave you that, and he knows that. So to keep him from exalting himself above that measure, because he probably was a very prideful man before he found God. In his walk as a Pharisee, right? He probably was. You can understand that. All his life being raised as a Pharisee, big pride there, yeah? God broke him down. So God is trying to keep him in that place that God is more. God is more. And so he said, at least I should rise above that more that God has given to me. A thorn in the flesh was given to me. A buffer. A reminder. To keep me humble. To beat me down when I try to rise above. And make myself more. Give myself a greater measure than God. Make myself more in my life than God should be. To buffet me. Least I should be exalted above measure. Not only by him, but by other people. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. Oh, I heard that how many times? Pray to Jesus that he might take it from you, that you won't be sick, won't be poor. Oh, I'm waiting for that blessing, my Lord, because I'm broken, busted. Many people cry out for funds, for finances. Many people cry out for goods. You know how you get money? You get rid of money. You know how you get goods? You get rid of your goods. That's how God does it. You let it go, you make God more, and he'll give it to you. That's how it works. Because when it's not important to you, it comes to you. Because he knows you'll use it the right way. When you hold on to it, you will lose it. Because why? Because it's the judgment. It's the handkerchief thing going on. Yeah? It's a judgment. He'll take it from you. He'll take it from you. That you may come to the revelation. Buffet, to beat you down, that you may come to the revelation. So you pray to God to bless you. You pray for a blessing, but you don't make it more. You ask God to heal you, but you don't make it more. You ask God for finances, but you don't make it more. And then he blesses you with finance, and then you give him the 10%. You see what I'm doing? You see how you still make yourself more? I just don't. That's why he said in verse 9, and he said to me, God tells him, my grace is sufficient for you. Anyway, having my favor upon your life is sufficient enough. Having me in your life is all you need, in other words. That's enough. Do you need all the stuff too to prove God? You don't. If you have nothing, will you still love him? For many people, they won't. They'll be crying out to God to save them from their nothingness, from their lack. They'll be crying out to God. But God is saying, my grace, my favor, my presence is sufficient for you being in your life. For my strength, he said, for my strength is made perfect when I am more than you in your weakness. When I become more, then my strength is there. Therefore, then Paul goes on to say, therefore, most gladly, I'd rather boast about my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Am I making sense now? 10, therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in need, in persecution, in distress, for Christ's sake, for the glory of the one who is in my life. For when I am weak, broken, and less, then I am strong because God is more. That's when you are strong. Not because you think you have faith, think you're strong, have an attitude like strength. No, because God is more. That's when you're going to be strong. And that's when you know you have humbled yourselves. Weakness is not about weak in strength. No, weakness is about humility. This is about humility. For when I am humbled before God, God becomes more. When I put God in his proper place, then he is in my life. When God is not in that place, when God is not glorified in that place, when God has to share the light with you, you will lose your light. Because who can come against the Spirit of the Lord? Who can teach God and counsel God and tell him what he has to do? Nobody can. We are his creation. We are not his creator. He does, because that's his favor upon us. His grace, his presence, his favor, his goodness is upon us. When my strength is made perfect, his likeness, his strength, his glory is perfected in our humility. when he is more. Sacrificing Isaac glorified God. It did. It made Abraham his best friend. It put Abraham in that proper place before God. And yet Abraham was willing to humble himself and sacrifice his son to show God that God is more. Zacchaeus was willing. He is willing to give up everything, half of all he has. Even if he lives in a position of hatred and persecution and judgment. He still did the good things for the glory of God. He knew where he stood with God in spite of where he stood in life. And we need to learn this lesson. Because we cannot use God as someone who gives and has to give and put God in a place of subject. God can never be subject to man. God can never be. And when your life is under his feet, then truly he will be God in your life. So when you are struggling, when you think you're lost, when you think you can't find your way, when you think you're not happy, when you feel like you're in bondage to something, let me tell you, in those hours, make God more. Humble yourself and put him in his proper place. But not for the moment because of need. Because he deserves to be there always. And that burden, that bondage, that thing that you struggle with can never have power over the God in you. Never. Whatever God is doing in your life, take note. Because the 2020 that's coming up, this is what he's asking. That he becomes more, and you, my friends, become less. Let him be glorified. Because let me tell you, we don't go to church so we can be saved. We go to church to glorify him because he is worthy. Amen? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I just thank you. I thank you for your message, your word, and your direction you have given your people. I pray from this day forward they will find the courage and the strength when they humble themselves before you. I pray that your light will shine ever brighter in their lives and through their lives. And I pray, my Lord, that you will have the glory that is rightfully yours. I thank you for every word you have spoken. I thank you for every heart you have touched, every spirit you have enlightened. And I pray, my Lord, that 2020 will not only be our best year, but it'll be yours in our lives. I praise you and thank you for all you're about to do. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Thank you, Jesus. I'm done. Woohoo. Oh, who's doing tithes and offering?